Amen. Good morning, y'all. My name's Will. I'm one of the pastors here. We've been walking through this series during Lent called The Space between John 14, where Jesus says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life, and between John 17. At the end of John 17, Jesus will finish this, what is effectively his last words to his followers before he is arrested at the beginning of John 18. And so, what we're going to look at this morning is the end of John 16, where in the passage we'll look at in just a minute, Jesus is going to essentially say the last thing he's going to say to his followers. And then in John 17, which we'll look at next week, Jesus is going to pray. And he prays not only for the hour that he's in, because everything we're looking at in this series is between communion and foot washing and his arrest. So he's going to pray not only for the hour that he's in, and not only for his followers, but he prays for future followers, which means he's praying for us. And so we'll take a look at that next week. But here this morning, we want to take a look at the last thing that Jesus says to his followers before he is arrested. Back in October, Alex and I, my wife and I, went to do early voting over at the Expo Center. We went on the last day of early voting. That's like nothing sums me up more than that sentence. I'm going to vote early, but I'm going to do it on the last day. Like, let's be responsible, but let's not make a big deal about it. Miss Georgia was there too, that runs our childcare. That's why she and I get along so well. Like, those are, if you are, I'm going to vote early, but I'm going to do it on the last day, you and I would get along really, really well. And so we're in this windy line at the Expo Center, and right behind us, this guy just went down. We found out later his blood sugar crashed, but I mean, he crashed. And it was behind us. We had our backs turned, and we just heard the sound of like his head. It was so loud. He almost fell into Alex. So he goes down, he, falls right into us. And so, I turn, people don't know what to do. I don't necessarily know what to do. He just fell right into me, but he came around in about, 15 or 20 seconds and asked him his name. And there was a nurse that was there. And so she came over and we just kind of start talking to this guy. Everybody else, that can be an awkward situation. They don't know what to do. People are trying to vote. People are on their lunch trying to vote. So there just kind of becomes a lot of like stepping around this guy and then coming back to, and like, I'm not even here to judge it. Let me say at the start of this, if he hadn't fallen right on top of us, I'm not sure we would have done something different in that space. But we're there, me and Alex and this nurse, and we're talking to him. And, the nurse is asking about his blood sugar, and he's got an app on his phone and all that. And she says, let me get you some crackers. And I said, why don't you let me do that? Seems between the two of us, if one of us is going to stay with this guy, it should be you. So it was very strange. Like, if you don't need me to tell you remember back in that season where it was like the integrity of our elections is at stake and democracy is at stake and all that. It was very empowering to go into the back room where I was like, I know our elections are at stake, but this man needs peanut butter crackers. And so they let me through, and I went and got crackers and came back out and gave the guy crackers. And I said, hey man, I don't know if this is your speed. But I would love to pray for you if that's okay. And he paused for a moment and then he said, okay. And so I prayed for this guy. And then the whole thing was, 8 to 10 minutes. The EMTs got there. They got him on the stretcher. They got him off to the hospital. But it was a very um, it felt good, to take care of somebody who's in that sort of situation. It was good to be in partnership with this other stranger who was, a nurse she was doing her part and I was doing my part or whatever. When it was over, this woman came up to me and goes, I just want to say what you did was amazing. Of course, I'm thinking what you did was amazing, staying with that guy and doing all that. And she looked at me and she goes, tell me, you must be a firefighter. I think I've told every firefighter and EMT that goes to this church that story. I said, no, ma'am, though I take that as a compliment. No, I'm merely a pastor. But it was such a, there's such great power in, there is the potential for such great power in being with people in those moments where even with total strangers, to be able to try to communicate like, hey, um, this is going to be okay. Um, there's something bigger than all this that is going on, someone bigger than all this who cares about you and loves you. And we want to pray to that someone, to that God, that you don't have to feel so alone. You don't have to feel so embarrassed. You don't have to feel, any of those other things. There's something very powerful about being able to encourage someone else in those moments. And in those moments, simultaneously, I was encouraged, even in being mistaken for a firefighter. I was encouraged, and the nurse was encouraged. Like there was, even in such a moment, there was a great deal of like encouragement that took place. And that is exactly really what Jesus is communicating to his followers at the end. This is John 16 and verse 33. This is the last chapter, or the last verse in John 16. This is the last thing that Jesus says to his followers in the Gospel of John. Then he's going to pray. All of John 17 is a prayer of Jesus. Then he's going to be arrested in 18. So we'll look at the prayer next week. This is the last thing he says to them. Jesus says, I've told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world. I've told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble. Take heart. I have overcome the world. Now, simultaneous presence of emotions up here. Jesus says, I've told you these things, which these things would encompass everything we've been looking at in this series. I've told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this series and in the one before, we've spent a lot of time talking about truth, about how everything Jesus says here is between I am the way, the truth, and the life in John 14, Pontius Pilate saying, what is truth in John 18. So we've spent all this time talking about the extraordinary value of truth and how hard and slippery that can be sometimes for us, even following Jesus today, to know what's true. But it's important to note here that Jesus says, I've said all this to you not just so that you might know the truth. I've said all this to you so that you may have peace. Because truth without peace, knowing the truth without it being able to cause you peace, isn't worth it. In the Old Testament, a king named Solomon prays, and God says, I'll give you anything you want. And he asks for wisdom. And God says, hey, that's a good answer. You could have asked for riches. You could have asked for any of these things. Solomon was wiser than anyone. He knew all of this truth. But if you read his writing in Ecclesiastes, he's the most anxious writer in the whole book. Just knowing truth is no guarantee that we will automatically have peace. If the truth we know does not lead us to something greater, if in what's really true, deeply true, capital T true, if that truth doesn't simultaneously lead us to peace, the truth can drive you crazy. Jesus says, I haven't just come so you'll know the truth. If you want to know what's true, follow me. Don't just know about God, know God through Jesus. But Jesus says, I've told you these things so that in me you may have peace, because you're going to need it. In this world you will have trouble. That needs no commentary from me, right? Or any preacher anywhere. In this world you will have trouble. You already know that. And the only commentary is to affirm that Jesus says, yeah, in this world you'll have trouble. But take heart. I have overcome the world. He's talking in the short term, both because of what's getting ready to happen here in minutes, that he's going to be arrested. He's told the disciples earlier in John 16, you're going to grieve, but your grief will turn to joy. Jesus is saying, I've overcome the world. I've overcome what's getting ready to happen to me in the short term. I'm telling you this even before it happens. But he's also saying it in the long term, as we talked about last week, because the way the world works doesn't work. But Jesus says, take heart, because I've overcome the world. All of the systems and all of the ways in which this stuff doesn't work and guarantees you trouble, take heart. I have overcome the world. And there is such power available to us in take heart, in our ability to encourage and be encouraged, especially in these moments. New Testament was originally written in Greek. Take heart is the Greek word tharseo, and Jesus doesn't say it very often. But there's a common thread when he does. There's here and then 4 other places where Jesus or someone related to what Jesus is doing says, take heart. Consider the common threads that run through these stories. Early in the Gospels, there's a man who can't walk, and his friends are trying to get him to Jesus. And they can't because Jesus is popular, and there's a crowd. And so his friends strap this guy to a mat, and in one version of the story, lower him through a hole, tear a hole in the roof, and lower him through it to get this man who can't walk to Jesus. And I love this painting. What's the guy like kneeling down in the front? Like, what is this guy's facial expression? Like, you got to be kidding me about what's happening here, right? This guy was in the front of the line to see Jesus, and this guy on the mat cut the line through the roof to come down here and see in the front. Jesus, in this story, looks at this guy on the mat and then looks at his friends who have loved him so much to do this thing for him. Jesus looks at his friends and says, take heart. And then he says, your sins are forgiven, which is not why he came down through the roof, right? And the Pharisees and others are like, this is early in Jesus' ministry, the Pharisees and others are like, whoa, 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 whoa. Who are you to be forgiving sins? And Jesus, almost as if challenged, goes, oh, okay, well, also then, rise and walk. And he does it. But even before the rise and walk bit, this guy who literally cannot get to Jesus without the help of his friends. This guy who is helpless. And helpless is, again, you don't need much commentary from me. Helpless is one of the worst feelings in the world. One of just the worst. But he's got friends who will do the thing for him. And in doing the thing, Jesus looks at them and says, take heart. Your sins are forgiven. I'm doing something greater for you than you could even realize or imagine. And then a little later, there's a woman who is not supposed to be doing this bit at all. She's a woman reaching for a man in public that she's not married to. She's bleeding and she can't get it to stop. In some versions of this story, she's seen doctor after doctor and she spent all this money and she's done all of these things. But she believes that if she just catches the hem of his garment, that he has healing in his wings. She reaches for him in a situation where she almost certainly had to be terrified, because when she does it and catches it, she's healed. And then Jesus says, who touched me? Again, I don't think he's asking because he doesn't know. Not a very good Messiah if that's the case. But in this moment, even after the healing has taken place, when he singles out this interaction, she has to be terrified because she's broken rules, customs, laws, all kinds of bad things can happen to her. Plus, she just got the thing she was looking for, and now it's instantly jeopardized. She could have kept quiet. In some versions of this, she could have remained hidden in the background, but she has enough faith to reach for the healing, and then she also has enough faith to believe in the healer. And comes forward, and Jesus says to her, take heart. Your faith has made you well. Not just for secondary players in the story, the disciples themselves, when they're on a boat And Jesus decides, I'd like to catch up to this boat. Let's just walk on the water. And you think about like whatever, this is a different sermon, but like whatever version, maybe you're a person who doesn't believe in ghosts at all, but if you're a person who does or is unsure, whatever version you have of I think I saw a ghost, it doesn't compare to this because he's actually out there. And these guys on this boat in this storm see this coming. These guys are terrified. And these guys are in an unfamiliar situation. Again, this isn't kind of like, oh, I think I saw a ghost or whatever you've got. He's actually out there. They don't have a support group for this either. And there's, I'm sure, no words. And Jesus says, take heart, it's me. Or it is I, if you like a more traditional translation. In the presence of the unfamiliar. A voice that speaks something familiar is of such great value to us. When Alex and I first came here, when our family first moved here, it was almost 3 years ago. It was at Vacation Bible School. So we moved to Powell, and then like the first thing we did as a church after we moved here was Vacation Bible School. So there was like a week where Covington, no joke, Covington knew this church better than we did. Covington was 5 at the time. Not even, he was almost 5. The first night of VBS, I came here and I got stopped by the security team because they didn't know who I was, which was A+ work by the security team. So we walked Covington back through these doors. He was 4, almost 5. Walked him back through these doors. And if you've met my son, he's an outgoing kid. He's never met a stranger, all that. But we were in a new city and a new place and all of these kinds of things. And it was summer of 22. Like the pandemic was a recent thing, you know? And he walked over here and Kathy Seuxbury was at the door. And he came to the door and he didn't know a soul. And he came to the door and he did like the half step back, you know? The one we know as adults sometimes too. And Kathy reached across the threshold into the hallway and grabbed his hand and said, let's find you a friend. Kathy Seuxbury is going to heaven long before that, but she's going on a rocket ship after that, right? And pulled him in. Again, you don't need me to tell you. Someone making something familiar in the unfamiliar. When we are somewhere we've never been before and we don't know anything, and these guys they got nothing to grasp to. Jesus says, take heart, it's me. To the helpless, to the afraid, to the unfamiliar, and finally to a man named Bartimaeus who is calling out for Jesus. He's blind. He can't see. He's calling out to Jesus, and the people are telling him to be quiet. Bartimaeus is desperate, much like the woman reaching. She's desperate. He doesn't care. He's just going to get louder. And Jesus says, as he's calling out, Son of David, have mercy on me. As he's calling out that, Jesus says, bring him to me. And this time, it's the people around him who say to Bartimaeus, take heart, he's calling for you. And they bring him close, and Jesus does the thing. To the desperate, to the helpless, to the afraid, to the unfamiliar, to all the spaces where we know these things, we know them in our bodies. There's extraordinary value in Jesus saying, take heart. That in John 16:33, that what Jesus says is at the very end, I've told you all this so that in me you might have peace. In this world you will have trouble. In this world you're going to be afraid sometimes. You're going to be in unfamiliar territory sometimes. In this world you might feel helpless. In this world you might feel desperate. In this world you will have trouble. Take heart. For the desperate, the lost, the hurting, take heart because I have overcome all of it. And in closing, the all of it that he has overcome includes this. 3 verses earlier, the disciples say this to Jesus. This is one of the few parts in this series that's not in the red letters. This is a disciple speaking this to Jesus. The disciples, after he's told them all this, the disciples say, now we can see that you, Jesus, know all things, and that you don't even need to have anyone ask you any questions. This makes us believe that you came from God. And Jesus says, do you? Do you now believe? Because the time is coming, and in fact, that time has come when you will be scattered, each to your own home, and you will leave me all alone. They say here at the finish line, we believe. And he says, do you? Because this is going to happen in minutes. When they come to arrest him, they'll run. And if I was there, I would have run too. And we're fooling ourselves to think we wouldn't. The time is coming, and it has in fact come, when you will be scattered here at the finish line. You're going to leave me all alone. He knows it, and he tells them. But he also says, but I'm not alone. The Father is with me. I've told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. For I have overcome this world, and what Jesus has overcome is not just this world, but it's our sin. Even at the finish line, when they want to believe so badly and Jesus knows exactly what they're getting ready to do, he doesn't end that by saying, you guys are a huge disappointment. He doesn't end it by saying, listen, let's just stop talking. This is going to get awkward. Come back in 3 days. Then we'll talk some more. It's here. It makes take heart, not just for the helpless, desperate, alone. It's take heart when we have failed it. Jesus says, take heart, because I've overcome this too. In this world, you will have trouble, and sometimes you are the cause of it. Take heart. I have overcome this too. So in just a minute, we're going to come here. This is where this story starts, the space between communion and foot washing and the arrest. We're going to come here, and there's value, I think, in remembering or acknowledging. That's why we pray, forgive us this day our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. There's value in acknowledging our need for grace when we come to this table. But when you come to this table, take heart. If you're desperate, alone, afraid, helpless, or in an unfamiliar situation, Jesus says, take heart. And if you have messed it up, if you have not just messed it up a little bit, you've not just jaywalked, you've messed it up. Jesus says, take heart. Because in this world, you're going to have trouble. I've said all this to you so that you might not just know the truth, but you, even in this moment, even those 12, even us, you might have peace in me. In this world, you will have trouble, and sometimes the trouble is you. Sometimes the trouble is me. But take heart. I've overcome all of it. I've even overcome you so that we might come and share in his death so that we might share in his life.